context. It's also about looking at the person's symptoms. Is the person showing symptoms of H. pylori? Are they having really bad reflux? Are they getting really bad bloating in the stomach after eating? Are they feeling nauseous when they don't eat, but feel nauseous when they do eat? It's about looking at the symptoms rather than just treating it because you test positive for it.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast, I sit down with researcher Dilly Kular to unpack the complex interplay between H. pylori, histamine intolerance, and acid reflux. We explore why these conditions are often misunderstood, how they're interrelated, and what steps can be taken to address the root causes rather than just managing the symptoms. If you or someone you know struggles with digestive issues, then this is a must listen. Dilly Kular, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Lee. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And to kick things off, could you share a little bit about your academic and professional background and what led you to get involved with gastrointestinal health?
So my background originally was in, let's just say I started in business. I don't have a background in, I'm not a practitioner, I'm not a functional medicine, didn't become a medical doctor or anything like that. I just kind of fell into the natural health industry through my own symptoms. I started getting really bad urticaria, and my urticaria was so severe that I was just on multiple antihistamines. And one day I got introduced to a product called Toxaprevent. And when I kind of found the product, I met one of the main doctors who's now passed away, sadly, a good friend of mine called Dr. Lars von Ollerschik-Alberheim. And Lars basically said to me, Dilly, take this product, your histamine symptoms will be gone. He goes, you will never have the problem again. And I was just like, you're lucky. I was a young boy then. I'd call myself a very young boy. And when he told me that, I was just so confused. I was like, Lars, what the hell are you talking about? And then I read into the product and I started taking it. 6 months later, I was completely urticaria free. 10 years, over a decade now on, I've had no urticaria symptoms. I've never had any histamine reaction. I eat and drink what I want. I stopped getting pollen allergies, which is what I kind of got into. And then from this, I started learning more about histamine. And histamine just turned into this, I kind of walked into this door and I was given all this information and I kept reading it. And I was like, everyone's wrong. Well, I wouldn't say wrong. They were making judgments on not the full information, and they were cherry picking information. And that's where I kind of came to the histamine. And then that started linking into things like H. pylori. And when I discovered about H. pylori and the not the actual bacteria, but when I started looking at what it does and how it functions, it was these eureka moments. I was like, I'm onto something here. And next thing you know, I've spent a lot of time just researching in-depthly into these gastro conditions that are linked with these toxins, basically.
Yeah, interesting. Just for the audience, can you describe what urticaria is?
So urticaria is what I would call an immune dysregulation. It's a histamine response where you get these spots and itchy red balls on the skin. Some people can get the inflammation in the skin, all around their body, but the only way to describe it is like that symptom. It's you want to tear your skin off. It's like your entire skin is on inflamed, or like little ants are running around on your skin. And you can just get it in an instant. It could be from being outside in the cold. It could be from heat. It could be you'd be really stressed. You could literally have a shower and wake up in the morning or whatever it is, and your skin just burns. And it's torture. Torture.
And you mentioned histamine. Can you explain what histamine is for the audience?
How long have you got?
I've got at least a couple of hours.
I tease. So histamine is... Histamine's a neurotransmitter. It's something the body releases. It's also commonly found in food, and it's known as a neurotransmitter. And the reason why it's known as a neurotransmitter is because when it attaches to a receptor, it triggers these receptors, which creates these different conditions. Histamine's mostly known because of the pollen season. So when you have seasonal allergies, pollen goes in, your immune system responds to it, it triggers mast cells to release histamine, and then histamine creates all these symptoms that to let you know. It's like a way of telling your body there's something going on. And I call it the inflammatory mediator. It's the red flag. It's the one that carries a flag to let you know what's going on. And histamine's fascinating because we need it. We actually need it. It's not bad, but too much is the problem.
Yeah, so basically it's always telling you, if there's too much, it's always telling you that there's something wrong with the body. The immune system is a good thing, right? But if your immune system is being overstimulated, it's telling you something. That be correct?
The immune system is the most important thing that we can ever, it's not just important, it's everything. If your immune system's high and it's too high, that's a problem. If it's too low, that's a problem. It's about achieving that equilibrium of balance. But the problem is, in today's society, we're exposed to so much and our immune system goes through so much that trying to get that balance is very, very difficult. Well, people say it's difficult. I think it's easily achievable, but it requires, the biggest cost is time. Time is the biggest cost in that circumstance.
Yeah. So just expanding on that. So histamine, you mentioned that was related to urticaria. You mentioned like hay fever season, that's an issue. What are some of the other kind of common conditions that we see with an overstimulation, if you like, of histamine?
Lee, it's linked to so much. So to kind of give you an idea, you've got 4 histamine receptors in the body. You've got the H1, H2, H3, and H4. And each receptor has its own, it has its own thing that it controls. So that the histamine 1 receptor, which is located in the skin, is what it lets us know that there's skin inflammation. It lets know that the white blood cells to go repair. You have the histamine 2 receptor, which regulates stomach acid. That's what keeps the gastrointestinal tract intact. It helps produce the acid when we're eating. It also lets us know that if there's something wrong in the body, like a bacterial infection, your mast cells will release that histamine to create inflammation to stop that bacteria or that toxin from getting worse. And then you've got the histamine 3 receptor, which controls the central nervous system. This actually controls our wake and sleep cycle. It also is it also links with our H2 receptor and controls our appetite. So when we want to eat or don't want to eat. And then you have the histamine 4 receptor, which is part of the immune cells. And that's actually linked with conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. All of these different receptors are responsible for different aspects of the body and the way the body functions. But histamine is linked to so many common conditions that we talk about, things like leaky gut syndrome. You've got leaky gut syndrome, gut inflammation, itchy skin, spots, acne, psoriasis, eczema, H. pylori. Oh God, the list it kind of just builds up and goes on. Rheumatoid arthritis, they're now developing antihistamines for that. It's one of those incredible neurotransmitters that's linked to so much. And it is an incredibly, I wouldn't even say it's misunderstood, but in some cases misinterpreted because, like I said, not too much isn't, histamine's good, but too much is the problem.
Yeah. So, I think what most people tend to think, if they've got, let's call it an overstimulation of histamine in the body, the go-to is, well, that's okay, I'll just take antihistamines, right? That's kind of, the mindset most people tend to have because that's kind of how they've been conditioned to think. Can you discuss what antihistamines actually do, and are they actually curing anything in your opinion?
Meet Julie, a 47-year-old working in computer sales who had been battling lifelong IBS. She suffered from severe abdominal pain, bloating, and frequent loose stools, low energy, brain fog, and hot flashes, all of which affected her work and quality of life. After thorough testing, we discovered the root causes. parasite infection, bacterial overgrowth, leaky gut, low digestive enzymes, and a vegetarian diet high in oxalates. With a tailored plan, Julie made dietary changes, added targeted supplements to balance her gut microbiome, and supported her digestion with prebiotics, probiotics, and enzymes. The results? Well, in Julie's words, the improvement is staggering. Her pain and bloating vanished, her energy levels soared, her brain fog and hot flashes disappeared, and her immune system became stronger than ever. If you're struggling with IBS or gut health issues, reach out today for a consultation at www.bodycheck.co.uk and let's uncover the root cause and create a plan to transform your health.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to laugh. I laugh because it's such a funny topic. I still remember when I was prescribed antihistamine, and I was really fortunate. My neighbor at the time was a GP. He was really good bloke, and he used to tell me about different antihistamines. And I remember he's just like, "Oh, Dilly, if this antihistamine doesn't work, you need to try this one because it's a bit more stronger." And now what? 12 years on, now I think about it and I'm like, oh my God, this doctor really he was telling me things that I really shouldn't have realistically been doing because I was messing with things that I shouldn't have. And the reason why I say this is this. So an antihistamine blocks a histamine receptor. It literally turns the receptor off. So as I mentioned before, you have those 4 histamine receptors. And when it turns that receptor off, all it means is that when the histamine is flowing around the system and it tries to attach that receptor, because that antihistamine is blocking it, it's not being triggered. So all of a sudden, you don't have the symptoms. But the issue is that antihistamine that you're taking, whether it's loratadine, whether it's cetirizine hydrochloride, famotidine, fexofenadine, pitolisant, whichever one it is, it's designed to turn off that specific receptor, unless you're going to the first generation antihistamines, which turned off multiple receptors. But when you turn that specific receptor off, okay, you've got rid of symptom 1, the symptom that's really cool. In case of seasonal allergies, you've gotten rid of that symptom. But when you've gotten rid of that symptom, great, it's no problem at all. But antihistamine's turned off, let's say, for example, that histamine 1 receptor. But all of a sudden, the histamine doesn't just go bye-bye. Oh, you've turned the receptor off, I'm going to disappear. The histamine travels and it builds up. And if the body can't break it down quick enough, which is why you have that histamine receptor being over-triggered in the first place, it will attach to the H2. Or the H3 or the H4. And then what happens is when the antihistamine wears off, because the histamine hasn't been broken down, it will then reattach that histamine 1 receptor. And so your symptoms still are coming back. But then there's another problem. You see, that receptors, that trigger that you've got, what's triggered your allergies or triggered your allergic reaction or your immune system to release that histamine, your immune system is still being bombarded with what's causing it. So it could be pollen, it could be water, it could be a food, it could be stress. So the minute the antihistamine wears off, because that histamine still flowing up and building up, your symptoms return with a vengeance. And that's the problem with antihistamines. All they're doing is they're not treating anything. And even the package says that. The package says relieves symptoms, and it emphasizes on the word relieves. It doesn't get rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same story, really, when I look at, a lot of, let's call it allopathic solutions. If we take, with histamine, obviously you get things like the redness and the itching, etc. But let's just use a different analogy, pain, right? Which is obviously something that I talk about a lot as well. Again, what's the go-to for most people if they're in pain? Well, pain medication or maybe an anti-inflammatory, right? But whether it's a pain signal or whether it's, histamine stimulating itchiness, let's say, both of those, whether it's pain or itchiness, the way that I like to look at it is it's your subconscious mind making your conscious mind aware that there's some kind of imbalance or something that's not right in the body. So if you then treat it by numbing the signal, like you said, you're not dealing with the root cause of the problem. And again, as you said, that's just going to bubble away in the background and get worse and worse and worse if all you're doing is, putting a Band-Aid over a broken leg, so to speak, right? So, it's something that I know, again, a lot of people out there that they are, for want of a better phrase, conditioned to think that way, right? And there's a lot of conditioning going on. And if people think they're not conditioned, then you need to listen to my episodes with David Charalambous and with Jason Christoph on that very subject. But yeah, it's something that I get very frustrated by, the fact that, when people have a symptom, their first thought is, well, how do I suppress the symptom? Not what's causing the symptom. Let me deal with the actual cause of the problem. And as you alluded to earlier, sometimes the issue is time. It takes more time to deal with the root cause, whereas just popping a pill, or could be getting an injection, will take your symptoms away, but you've not taken the problem away. And the analogy that I've used time and time and time again is, if you're driving your car and the engine warning light comes up, what's it telling you to do? It's telling you to take your car to a mechanic to check the engine to find the problem. But if you took them to an allopathic mechanic, they're either going to put a piece of black tape over the light on your dashboard, or they're going to cut the electric wire to the bulb so that the light won't come on anymore. They're not going to fix the engine. So I guess from what you're saying is the antihistamine is like the piece of black tape where you're covering the engine warning light. So you're pretending it's not there. You're brushing it under the carpet.
Yeah, exactly. They're not just brushing it under the carpet. In some circumstances, so I always get, I say the team always we get the customers who have been in the arena for a while. And some of the stories you hear them, they're taking an antihistamine, then they're prescribed another one, or they're told to double their dosage. And recently I've started to see people with 4 times, like they're taking the antihistamine 4 times daily. And I'm literally I have to sometimes, like when I put the calls down or I start being people, I have to take a minute, because I'm like, this is bonkers. Like if this medication's not working the first time round, why the heck are you giving the person it 4 times in a day? And this is the issue. Is like, we've, as you talked about the idea that we've been trained into it, it's the terminology that they've used, antihistamine. And I keep saying to people, I'm not antihistamine, because I do see their benefit, because sometimes symptom relief is what we need to kind of get rid of, like, to be able to control it. But the fact that we can go around and use that, it's like it's the chosen method, is just bonkers. And I always say this to my colleague on the show. And I always say to her, I'm like, sometimes I just look at it and I'm like, how is this allopathic? Like, how is the natural industry called alternative? Because technically the natural industry is not an alternative, it was the original industry. Technically the allopathic model is the alternative model, which is just, it's something I've always thought about. And I'm like, the more and more I learn about it, I'm like, a lot of it is, as you say, programming.
Yeah. Again, what's interesting, when I did my training in functional medicine many years ago now, one of the things that was taught to us, yes, I mean, the key thing about functional medicine is finding the root cause of the problem. But also, there is a time for what was described as intelligent allopathy, right? Symptom relief, right? So there is a place for that. And I don't think either of us are suggesting that there isn't. But yes, and again, you can understand, perhaps someone wakes up one morning, got terrible hay fever as an example. Their eyes are streaming. They can't even see where they're going, let alone drive their car to work, right? And they've got to get to work, maybe got an important meeting or interview or whatever. Okay, you can understand why someone would take an antihistamine in that situation. But long term, okay, what's causing the problem? You need to look at what's causing it, rather than, oh, well, every time I get that, I'll just pop a pill, right? Let's deal with it at the root cause level,
Well, Lee, you talk about the pollen allergy there, that analogy there. Let me just add, like, to this. You talked about how it's all driven. So, to give you an example with pollen allergies, we talk about the immune dysregulation. But and not many people know this, but did you know that a lot of the reason why pollen allergies are on the rise is because of the way we plant trees, which just seems crazy, right? Basically, years and years ago, people in councils and governments and planning control teams, when they were building all these beautiful cities and towns, what they realized was you have male and female trees, right? The male trees produce the pollen and the females produce the seeds. And what would happen, these flowers, when they're pollinating, that pollen needs to travel and attach that seed. That's a normal environment, right? That's a homeostatic environment. But what happened was when autumn came around, if the tree wasn't pollinated, the seeds would fall down. And when the seeds would fall down and hit the floor, it created mess. So as the world developed, they started realizing, oh, actually, do you know what we need to start doing? We need to start planting female trees. We should plant more male trees because the pollen, you can't see it. You can't see the pollen. So they started planting all these male trees, but the pollen started increasing. And then as it started increasing, as all the female trees decreased, the pollen increases. And then they started planting more. Now they're like being told we need to plant more greenery and to protect the green environment. Because they're protecting it, they're creating more male trees. So there's more pollen coming out. And so everyone keeps saying, like, you know, I keep laughing. I get on my laptop, I get these like notifications going, high pollen count today. Well, of course there's high pollen count because there's too many damn male trees. It's bonkers. So it shows you that, like, it's not even like our immune system. It's our body is being bombarded with that pollen. And it blows my mind. And just, you know, imagine saying that to your local council, saying, can you please plant more female trees? They're going to say no, because it creates a mess. And then we have to pay more for cleaners to come and clean it up. That's the reason why pollen allergies are on the rise.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, within my own family, like my dad has always suffered from hay fever. My aunt, so his sister, always suffered from hay fever. But I've never suffered from it. One of my sisters, I don't think, has ever had it. And then one of my other sisters has had it. And it's kind of like, well, we live in the same environment. What's different as to why we don't get it and then that they do get it? And I'm not saying this is the answer, but I've had a couple of clients that have come to me, not because they got hay fever, but for other issues. But obviously in their paperwork, they've said they suffer from hay fever. And obviously sometimes when they've come to see me, you know, I can actually physically see that they've got hay fever. And there's two clients. So one of the things I sometimes do is run food sensitivity testing. And when they've cut out the foods that they're sensitive to, their hay fever goes away. Now I've got an idea as to why that might be. Have you got an idea as to why that might be?
So food is like one of those. Food has been like the big go-to for the histamine community for many, many, many years. In 2000 and in the 2006, there was a really lovely lady, Yasmin. She did a lot about the low histamine diets and stuff, and taking out the histamine foods. And many people do see like a difference in the histamine when they remove those triggers. However, that is not the solution, because there was this focus more on the histamine in food being the problem. Now, the reason why it's been focused as the solution was because it's something that we can control, because we can't control the pollen. Unless you're cutting down trees, you can't control the pollen. But what we can control is what we put into our body. So because we can control that, people started talking about taking out those foods. But I bet you, Lee, in all my time of doing this, I have not met someone who's gone on the low histamine diet and managed to reverse their symptoms. And the reason being is because when the immune system's overreactive, the immune system is producing antibodies, or IgE, against what it thinks is bad. It's what the body thinks and what it assumes is bad, because it's thinking the pollen is bad. Pollen isn't bad, but too much of it's a problem. And the immune system thinks that too much pollen is bad. It can then think that the food is bad. It can think that the water is bad. It can think that the supplements that you eat is bad. And it's because the immune system is overreactive. And this is where the issue lies, because you will get relief in the short term, 100%. Go on that low histamine diet, you would definitely get relief. Remove those trigger foods, you would definitely get relief. But long term, until you reduce that histamine bucket, until you lower the histamine bucket, until you look at what caused that histamine response in the first instant, is it H. pylori? Is it low vitamin D? Is it lack of vitamins and minerals? Is it eating the wrong foods? Until we address that, you are never going to get a root cause solution. That's my opinion.
Yeah, my thoughts were, and again, I mean, these clients, again, probably going back 15 to 20 years. My view at the time was, okay, so if you've got hay fever, it's an overstimulation of the immune system. If you're eating foods that you're sensitive to, that's stimulating the immune system. So by removing the foods that are overstimulating your immune system, you're just taking the load off of the immune system. That was purely what my thought was at the time, which is kind of similar to what you were saying, really. I mean, I'm not sure we definitely do know the answer now, but probably not too far off the mark there, I think.
I don't disagree there, Lee. I don't think we're too far off the mark. We're learning a lot about the immune system now and a lot about histamine, but the issue is the solution at the moment, still the common focus is on looking at antihistamines. And like we were doing a recording yesterday, and I made the joke. I said, like, there's 236.9 billion reasons why someone needs to take an antihistamine. And the reason why I use that complete figure is because that's what the antihistamine market's worth. It's worth that much globally.
Wow.
Just think about that figure, 236.9 billion.
Wow.
That's a big market that of antihistamines that we're up against.
Yeah, I never realized it was that big. I mean, I know a colleague of mine wrote a book called The $39 Billion Reasons to Lie About Cholesterol. Right? So I didn't realize that antihistamines was even bigger than like the statin market, which is huge. But yeah, we could go down a big old rabbit hole with that one. Just moving on. So just getting back, if you like, to Helicobacter pylori or H. pylori. Can you explain more about what it is and where we tend to find it in the body? And also, does it always have negative consequences? Did you know that 92% of people fail to follow through on their New Year's resolutions? That's right. Year after year, most of us start strong and then lose momentum by February. Sound familiar? But what if this year could be different? What if you finally had the tools to make your goals stick? Introducing Stickability, a simple, effective, and affordable program designed to help you overcome the cycle of failed resolutions. In just a short time, you'll learn how to create lasting habits without wasting hours or breaking the bank. This isn't just another plan. It's the solution to finally sticking to your healthy lifestyle goals. Don't let this year be like the last. Head over to stickabilitycourse.com now to enroll. It's affordable, easy to follow, and packed with tools to make 2025 the year that you have the ability to make it stick.
So H. pylori is an incredible bacteria. It's the one bacteria that has it stood the testament of time. And like they've actually isolated it from I think the caveman that they found, I think it was like the Antarctica somewhere, they found a caveman. They actually isolated a strain of H. pylori from the stomach of this cave person. And it's an incredible bacteria which is in the stomach. And depending on where you are on the world, there are different strains of it. So they found a different DNA of depending on which country you go to. So like in Europe, they call it HP Europe, for example, and in South Africa, they call it HP SA, for example. And this bacteria, for the life of us, we still don't understand why it increases. We know that it can be passed on from person to person, but what we don't understand is why does it all of a sudden just completely flourish and go crazy? I have my theories. I've read the research, but I'm still understanding it. But H. pylori, as you said before, it's been known as like a negative bacteria. However, the issue is there are positive sides to it. So when you look at like treating H. pylori, though we found like though we've like understood that it's it needs to be we've been told it needs to be killed. When you actually look at when H. pylori is killed, they actually understood that basically when you remove the bacteria, the leptin in the system completely decreased, and leptin's the hormone that our body releases, which actually helps us maintain normal weight on a long-term basis. And they actually saw, and the leptin receptors are there to work on the GLP-1 receptor. And as you know, GLP-1 is a big conversation now being talked about because of the new wonder drug, should we call it. And what they're finding now, more and more research, is they're saying that when H. pylori is eradicated, it actually reduces the hormone ghrelin, which is what actually controls our appetite and weight gain, and which is also linked to when we have problems with sleeping. When ghrelin disappears, we actually have those issues. So now we're starting to understand that maybe this bacteria does have a beneficial effect. But what we're trying to understand is why is it bad? Why is it negative? What's it doing that it's causing all these symptoms? And I have my theories.
So have a guess what my next question is.
Go on.
Share your let's hear your theories.
So with H. pylori, we know that it can be passed on from person to person. It's not unheard of where an entire family, the mom, the dad, the child, the mom, both dads, whichever you want to, however the family makeup model is, could be a carrier of this bacteria. And we know it can be passed on person to person. And we also know that it forms like something called a coxoid form. So even if you try to destroy it, it's able to lie in the stomach lining dormant for a long time. And it's fascinating because there's an element of genetics to it. They say it's genetics that play a role, that it could be your genetics that the reason why you get it. I think it's more to do with an acid-base balance. I think it's more to do with an environment where the body's not unable to digest food. And I think it's more to do with an overuse of antibiotics. I personally think that H. pylori, it's known as an antimicrobial resistant bacteria. And it's on the top 20 WHO list of bacteria that are going to become resistant to AMR. And I personally believe that because of globalization, because of importing foods from different countries, from different cities, from different areas, and because of the fact that we're now, mass producing so much food and we're spraying so much antibiotic with foods, this bacteria is starting to flourish in different ways and it's starting to mutate its own genetics. That's just my theory. And the more I learn, I'm starting to see that very much could be true.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just to pick up one thing you said, because I know it's just the way you said it. You said putting food on antibiotics, but you put antibiotics on food, right? Just in case the audience are thinking, "What? How does that work?" Yeah, it's what's really interesting. So again, I don't know how much of my story you know, but I had severe acne when I was young. I took antibiotics for 18 years. And, the earliest tests I had done did show up H. pylori. They haven't done for a long time. And again, it almost backs up your theory that, as I've kind of got healthier, I guess there hasn't been a need for that H. pylori to be there or to flourish anyway, or to be there in high quantities. So that kind of backs up what you're saying. And that's beginning to answer a question that I've got lined up for you a bit later anyway, but we'll come back to that. How does H. pylori protect itself, and what are the common symptoms when someone has like an overabundance of H. pylori?
Yeah, both really good questions. Do you mind if I just clear something up and go back a little bit? Would you mind? I wanted to, because
sure.
I know some people are going to probably listen to this, and they were like, "What the hell does he mean by antibiotics in food?" And they're going to probably like, "What do you mean? Like, what's that got to do with the food, right?" So the reason why I brought this comment up was I actually met a professor, a chap who's going for his doctorate. His name's Jay Garcia. His published research was published in I think it was March 2024. So very up-to-date research, because we'll get killed if research is too far out of date these days. I've seen people get hung up for it's 5 years old, that must be a lie, but still valid. I do believe. Jagat is one of the most interesting people I've met. We've actually did a really good recording with him, and he actually looked at antibiotic residues in UK foods. So not Europe, not America, just in the United Kingdom. And he started looking at how much antibiotics were in food. If you break down his research, in most foods, most foods that he tested for. So he tested for, I think it was 10 different antibiotics. In nearly every single food of some food, he found one of the 9 antibiotics. In some cases, 3 or 4 versions of the same of different antibiotics. In particular, mycin. They're the family, they're the mycin bacterias, and they're the ones that come off like amoxicillin and penicillin. And these antibiotics that they're using, in some cases, he actually found in his research that farmers during the pre-pandemic levels and during the pandemic were importing illegal antibiotics that weren't allowed in the food chain and actually spraying this on to animals because of that mass manufacturing. And because they were spraying it onto the physical meats, it wasn't dying off quick enough. And then because it wasn't being cleaned up quick enough, he goes, it was being leached into the actual animal. And then when they were slaughtering the animal, they then would spray a reduced form of the antibiotic. So you've got this antibiotics being put into the actual production of the animal and the actual, the growth part of it. Then during the actual destroying of the animal, and then putting into the actual physical end use product. And he was saying at every bit of that life chain, there was antibiotics in that meat. And then he said, and the problem was, it wasn't just the meat, it was the vegetables as well, because of the runoff from the animals was entering the vegetables. And so this overuse of antibiotics has started to train the bacteria to be resistant to it. And this is why, I talk about it, because it's like, it's become the animals, and then us have become the party place for the bacteria to thrive.
Yeah, again, there's something that I have discussed a little bit with a film producer called Stephen Lawrence. So I did an episode called Invisible Extinction, which is the name of his film. And they talk about, how they use antibiotics with livestock. And one of the reasons they do that is because it makes the animals fat and sick, right? And so the fatter an animal is, the more money they make, right? They don't do body fat measurements on a cow before they sell it, right? It's just, what does it weigh? You sell it by weight. So they're injecting all these animals with antibiotics. Well, guess what? We're going to consume those antibiotics when we eat them, right? And the other thing and you were saying the runoff from the animals is affecting the plants. But then also, that's when we go to the toilet as well. That's got to go somewhere, right? That's not just going to disappear, is it? It's going to be somewhere. And quite often, we find things like antibiotics, birth control pills, recreational drugs. They're all in the water supply, right? Of some sort, And that's just the good news.
I would say to people, if water supplies were healthy, we wouldn't have water filters. Brita wouldn't be one of the most largest filtration companies in the world if water supply wasn't a problem. And stop telling me it's all about hard water. It's not hard water. That's not even part of it. What's his name? The guy that does all the TV shows has brought his own water. Is it Water 2 company or something? I've got his name now. The Bear Grylls. Even he's got a water filtration system coming out. And if it was a problem, I think governments would be shutting it down and saying this is bullshit. But they're not.
Yeah. Well, don't speak too soon. I could see governments clamping down on things that tend to make us healthy, but that's another story. So H. pylori, it's in the stomach. So the question was, how does it protect itself, and what are some of the common symptoms when people got high levels of H. pylori?
H. pylori is known as something called the urease enzyme excreting bacteria. This is where it basically releases this enzyme which breaks down urea into carbon dioxide and into ammonia. And then what it does is H. pylori triggers the release of histamine from the mast cells. When histamine releases, it triggers a specific receptor in our stomach called the histamine 2 receptor. And that receptor triggers the release of stomach acid, and it increases that stomach acid. And what that does is it allows that ammonia, to go through a process called protonation and be converted into ammonium. And when it becomes ammonium's an alkalizer. So if you look at the pH scale, it's more toward the alkaline area. And what H. pylori does is it uses that as a protective shield. And at the same time, it's triggering the stomach lining to release more of that histamine. So it's increasing the acid. And as that acid goes up, the stomach viscosity, the actual stomach acid, becomes thinner. And as the viscosity reduces, this allows the H. pylori to use its little flagella to swim. And as it swims along, it will then attach itself to the stomach lining. And that's the way it does that is it uses lipopolysaccharides. That LPS is what it uses to attach itself to the tight junctions in the stomach. And once it's attached itself in the stomach, it then releases VAC-A and CAG-A. And what these two endotoxins do is they are what trigger the stomach lining to break down. They actually cause cell death in the stomach lining. And as it starts to cause that cell death, and as it starts to break down that stomach lining, it can then slowly start burrowing through the stomach lining. And so when that happens, the stomach and the body tries to defend itself. And as I was saying at the start, there's mast cells which line the entire gastrointestinal tract. Mast cells are located all around the body. And the first line of defense is those mast cells. And it's one of the primary sources of defense. And what these mast cells do is they start to release histamine to create an inflammatory barrier. And because it's creating that inflammatory barrier, you have this constant buildup of histamine, which is triggering other receptors, increasing stomach acid, causing gastrointestinal issues further down, triggering acid reflux. It's this constant cycle of these toxins being released. And this is where relies the problem. The ammonium and the histamine, they're the two things that we need to be focusing on.
And do they cause like specific problems in their own right as well?
So histamine, as I was saying, leads to so many different symptoms because it's attaching to different receptors. But ammonium in itself, though it's an alkalizing model in terms of like it protects the H. pylori, ammonium is very toxic to the body. It's actually a byproduct of protein breakdown from when people have excessive amounts of meat. So not excessive amounts of meat, excessive amounts of protein. So it's part of our heavy protein diet. Ammonium was a diet of it. And the problem is ammonium in really high quantities, the only way to get rid of it is to convert it back into urea and then use the urine to pass out the system. But because if ammonium is really, really high, it can lead to so many different symptoms because it can actually poison the blood, shall we call it? And as it poisons the blood, it can lead to things like dizziness, feeling really tired, lethargic. You just feel really bloated. Your body starts to become inflamed. And it can actually lead to serious neurodegenerative diseases, which is what always worries me when people have really excessive protein diets.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting because I do eat quite a lot of protein myself, but with no symptoms. So, and that's been 25 years or so.
Sorry.
But I guess, yeah, maybe I've got all the hydrochloric acid and all the enzymes, etc., to break that stuff down. Maybe
it's one of those. It's not. I think it only becomes a problem in certain circumstances. It's when the body is too toxic. As in, like, you're eating the wrong things, or you're in a really heavy deficit and you're eating like real processed foods and the meats that are, different kinds. I think ammonium from high protein diets normally isn't a problem, but there are genetic predispositions that can trigger it. Or if we're eating protein in such a way, in such an excessive amount, and we don't have enough of the right enzymes to break it down. I have seen it with certain athletes where they do eat very high protein diets and they start to get uric acid buildup in their joints, so their joints start to ache. And normally it's a very, very quick fix. We just need to adjust their ammonium levels, and that can be very, very simple to do.
Where do you stand on the link between H. pylori and stomach cancer?
I mean, it's definitely known as a carcinogen. So I do completely understand, that it's linked with it, but I also think that there's more to it than meets the eye, because there's certain antibiotics that are given to animals and given to humans, which are also banned in the United Kingdom and still available in the EU, which are classed as class 1 carcinogens. In particular, there's one specific antibiotic. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of it, but it's an antibiotic that they've given. It's called trimethoprim. And that's, is it trimethoprim? I think it is. Yeah, I think it's trimethoprim. It's a certain antibiotic that's very, very dangerous, and it's classed as a carcinogen. So, I understand the stomach cancer premise with H. pylori because of it digging in, but it's an immune response.
Yeah. Might come back to that question a bit later on. So, in terms of the number of H. pylori cases, are you seeing like an increased number? And if so, why do you think that is?
Attention, all radical health rebels. Are you ready to uncover the truth the authorities don't want you to know? We've just launched our Radical Health Rebel channel on Rumble. Here's the deal. We're bringing you the first half of our subscriber-only episodes for free. That's right, free access to the hard-hitting, eye-opening conversations that dig into the topics mainstream platforms won't touch. Whether it's cutting-edge health insights, exposing hidden agendas, or sharing tools to thrive in challenging times, this is your chance to stay informed without subscribing to the podcast. Tune in on Rumble to keep track of what's really going on in the world and join a growing community of truth seekers. Don't miss out. Search Radical Health Rebel on Rumble and start watching today. Because knowledge is power, and it's time to take yours back.
Sorry, just give me a second. It's a good question. I think the increase in cases of H. pylori have been down to the fact that it's becoming antimicrobial resistant. And I think the increase in use in PPIs is going to be one of the main root causes, because H. pylori thrives in it can thrive in the lowest acid environment and even in high acidic environment if it goes to a coccoid form. But if people are using continuous use of PPIs, it's able to flourish in that environment. And I think because it's starting to change, because we're starting to have so much globalization and we're traveling to different countries, if we catch a strain, I don't know, of H. pylori Africa, for example, or H. pylori Europe, or H. pylori Middle East, wherever we're getting that bacteria from, if we bring it back to our country, because our genetics and body isn't built for it, that can lead to an increase in those problems. And the issue is that our first line therapy now is moving away from triple therapy. It's moving towards quadruple therapy, which is use of more antibiotics. But the problem is, imagine you're someone who travels a lot. We're living in a world of globalization where people are traveling to different countries all the time. If you're traveling to all these countries constantly, that you could eradicate it, but you've trained the bacteria to fight that antibiotic, because you're literally training it. That's the whole point of the antibiotic, because, not the whole point of it, but it will train the bacteria to become resistant to it. And as the bacteria becomes resistant to it, you then are faced with the same problem. And if you don't do any other changes to your lifestyle, the bacteria comes back, and next thing you know, it's thriving. And then you pass it on to people. You'll go to different places, and if you don't wash your hands correctly, it could be on food, it could be from anything. So I think H. pylori is it's on the rise. I'm seeing it more and more, but I'm also seeing the fact that people are trying to treat something that's not a problem either, because sometimes what can happen is people will, I say it's down to symptoms. It's not just about doing a urea breath test. It's also about looking at the person's symptoms. Is the person showing symptoms of H. pylori? Are they having really bad reflux? Are they getting really bad bloating in the stomach after eating? Are they feeling nauseous when they don't eat, but feel nauseous when they do eat? It's about looking at the symptoms rather than just treating it because you test positive for it.
So one of the things you mentioned there is obviously people are becoming more antibiotic resistant, but obviously that's a treatment, right? But if people are getting that, getting high H. pylori in the first place, have you got thoughts on why that is? Obviously the treatment is what comes next, right? But if there's more people don't like to use the word, diagnosed with H. pylori, Any idea why that might be on the increase?
Once again, just globalization. I think more people are being diagnosed with it because we've had like an increase in hygiene. Like hygiene's become a big thing, but then we can go to other places where the hygiene isn't as good, or someone's not done as good as of hygiene, and you've touched you've touched something that wasn't cleaned properly, or you've eaten something that wasn't was made with unwashed hands, or children. I've got children, and I've seen the way the kids play and stuff. They don't care about hygiene. They're not washing their hands constantly, or in some cases they're overwashing their hands and overusing certain certain hand cleaners, for example. And all of these things are like having an impact on the microbiome. We've never looked at looking at the hand sanitizers. There's never been a study done at the impact of hand sanitizers on food. We've never seen, there's no correlation. But how can you not say there's not a correlation when we're having more and more antimicrobial resistance? It's a cocktail. It's a cocktail, and the cocktail mixer or the cocktail shaker is you as the individual.
Yeah, I would imagine another factor is probably because people's lifestyles are getting worse as well, right? Their lifestyles are getting worse. They're probably under more stress. I think the last 5 years has been pretty stressful for most people as well. And, it wouldn't surprise me, if a reduction in healthy living and stress, that's got to be, part of the ingredients in the melting pot, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. And like, you just reminded me of something. I remember when I was speaking to JGAG, me and Tracy were speaking, had a long conversation with him. And I remember talking to him before we did the recording and after as well. And he was just talking, one particular was like hamburgers. And he was just telling me, he was like, he reminded me of my memory of something. I think it was like 2011. I remember watching the news about like a farmer being convicted for using antibiotics in it's like Northern Ireland somewhere. He was convicted for like using too much antibiotics on food or something. And he was like using, black market antibiotics. And JGAC was saying that one of the most common foods where they found the highest amount of antibiotics was like, processed meats. And that includes like burgers, because when the different meats are coming together. And it was interesting. The British government did this something called the Population Correction Unit, the PCU. And what we find is, meats that are kind of put together. So let's say you've got a herd of cows. You've got 50 cows. And cow 1, they're all named 1 to 50. So number 1 could be healthy, but number 3 could be really unhealthy. And number 3 gets loads of antibiotics. And then number 10 gets loads of antibiotics, and 15 gets antibiotics, and all 20 gets antibiotics. It doesn't matter how much antibiotics in there. What they would do is they couldn't account for all of it. So all of them had antibiotics. They would then kill all of them. They pack them all together, and you would never. And then what they would do is they make an average. They take an average of how much antibiotics you. So you could have like 5 really sick, unwell cows who were given antibiotics from the day that they were born all the way to the day that they were slaughtered. And you've got these ones being mixed into the environment. And this is the problem. There's no actual real strong legislation around food. And the problem is now our access to food is limited unless you're going to your local farm. And, as you said, life is stressful. Life is busy. We're trying to make things easier. But, the growth of things like Just Eat, Deliveroo, DoorDash in America, like you've got all these massive things. You don't know where that person's sourcing their food from because they're trying to keep their costs low. So you don't know what's in that physical food. And they're trying to make sure that they're getting they talk about quality, but they're trying to get the food for the cheapest price possible to maximize profits in order to turn a profit. And this is the issue. You've got these adding to that cocktail mix.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. That reminds me of the pharmaceutical industry as well. They seem to have the same playbook, so to speak. So you mentioned antibiotics. You've mentioned triple therapy and quadruple therapy as a potential treatment for H. pylori. Can you explain what triple therapy, quadruple therapy actually is? And you kind of alluded to it, but again, just go over kind of how effective that can be as a treatment.
So triple therapy is like it was the holy grail. It was the holy grail out for most, the model basically. And what triple therapy? It's a mixture of a proton pump inhibitor. So a PPI is what reduces. It basically stops the stomach from producing acid. So because it stops producing acid, the premise is that the H. pylori will release that ammonium shield. And then what they do is they put in two different types of antibiotics. So either amoxicillin or clarithromycin, or I think the third one is metronidazole. And what will happen is the GP or practitioner has to discuss whether you've had, a mycin antibiotic before. If you've had that antibiotic before, the chances of you being resistant are much higher. So they'll give you metronidazole, for example, in interchange of it. So that's triple therapy, which the idea is release that ammonium shield, antibiotic goes in, destroys the bacteria, and voila, you've walked out and you're H. pylori free. And then quadruple therapy is different. So quadruple therapy, the model is that you would take the PPI plus bismuth and then amoxicillin or tetracycline or levofloxacin or rifabutin or I think it's furosemide, I think it's called. Sorry, my pronunciation could be off sometimes. But they use these different antibiotics depending on what they're going for. However, what's interesting is the model. Now, I've told you about the antibiotics that you're using, right? But what happens is, let's say, right, I'm average Joe. I walked into my surgery and I said, Doc, I got these symptoms. What should I do? Doc goes, diagnoses you and says, you've got H. pylori, my friend. We're going to kill it with triple therapy. You go, okay, no problem at all. So the model goes like this. Come in for triple therapy. You do that for 7 days. You then come back, and if you're still symptomatic, we then do triple therapy again. But we switch the antibiotic round. So it's either clarithromycin or metronidazole. And then you do that. And let's say at each point, there's points. If it works, then you don't come back. But if it doesn't work, from those 2 triple therapy treatments, and if you're still symptomatic, we then can do triple therapy again. So you do triple therapy 3 times. But on the 3rd time, what we do is we switch the antibiotic for a more stronger one. And then if that triple therapy fails all 3 times, and you're still symptomatic, we then ignore the triple therapy and we go to quadruple therapy and add in bismuth. And then what we do is we then play a game of rolling the dice, and we use the different antibiotics. At each one of those points, those touch points, you haven't had a break. You've not rebuilt the microbiome. And at each one of those points, you're playing with fire because you're using every single different type of antibiotic, including the main one, which is amoxicillin, which is one of the daddies of antibiotics in all those processes. And that's what triple therapy does. It's crazy. It's crazy.
And do you know kind of how successful triple therapy is? Because we were talking about Dave Hompers before we started recording, and I remember his book that he wrote a long, long time ago was kind of suggesting that it was continually getting less and less positive results. What's the kind of up-to-date view on that?
So there was an ongoing clinical trial in the United Kingdom. It was done between 2001 and 2018. I will send you the papers and you can link them in the description so people can read them themselves, because there was actually no routine surveillance done on H. pylori and looking at antimicrobial resistance. And they published a trial in, I believe, 2023. And they said of all the H. pylori isolates, around 28% of them were resistant to clarithromycin, and about 3% were becoming resistant to metronidazole and amoxicillin. And they estimated, by the way, so remember that word, because words matter, right? They estimated about 59,000 people were antibiotic resistant due to H. pylori. And one of the biggest problems was a bacteria called Campylobacter infection, which is one of the reasons why we become so resistant to antibiotics.
So it's not looking too good, is it?
My friend, it's going to be one of those, Lee, looking at H. pylori now, I've looked at the Maastricht consensus report, the Maastricht Flonce's consensus report. It's where a group of doctors get together and they read all the latest research on H. pylori. And I've been following it for a long, long time. And they've tried to bypass triple therapy, and they're now recommending that everyone goes to quadruple therapy. So they just bypass triple therapy altogether, especially in countries which are what we would describe as first world. And they're saying that we want to basically bypass these. And the issue is, if quadruple therapy doesn't work, the long-term solution is a PPI daily and then a histamine 2 antagonist like famotidine, and the person must stay on that for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Scary.
I mean, PPI is, there's the old joke, isn't it? Gary Delaney, the comedian, said, I thought PPI was what you got when you swam in the children's swimming pool.
That's a good joke. I like that one. I might steal that one.
Well, we're not referring to that, right? It's the proton pump inhibitors, as you mentioned earlier. But again, they link, PPIs are linked with things like SIBO, right? And again, we could talk about all the potential side effects that PPIs cause. And what was the other drug you mentioned?
The amoxicillins, or the antibiotics, or you're on about the bismuth. Oh
no, you were saying.
So it's a histamine 2 receptor antagonist. So it stops the histamine 2 receptor from producing stomach acid.
Right. Yeah, you don't need stomach acid, do you? It's not very important in the body.
I love the sarcasm, my friend. I love the sarcasm.
Yeah.
Can I just I'll just add to this? I gently touched on triple therapy and quadruple therapy. When we Google these antibiotics, and you Google them, and they'll just say, like, they'll give you the gods of Google will give you the basic information. But when you actually go in and break down what the antibiotic does to the bacteria, I mean, levofloxacin, if you want to, one of the first ones they use, that actually destroys the DNA and the DNA processes of the bacteria. But when you're reading it, you think, oh, it's destroying the DNA of that specific bacteria, H. pylori. But you and I know, and all the listeners listening on this know, that an antibiotic will not just destroy that specific bacteria, it will destroy all those bacteria. And so if you're messing and inhibiting that DNA repair process using this antibiotic, and you've got all of these, because we're not talking about just bad bacteria, we're talking about the commensal, the good bacteria, all those different things. You're messing with every single part of that. And that, for me, is what scares me. Lee, there's things that make me take a deep breath. When I read these papers, I took a deep breath, and I remember just sat, and I walked into my colleague's room and I said, can you believe they're giving this to people, and people are just willingly taking this? And please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you can't use these, but I'm saying the way that they're being used and the way that they're being overused is morally wrong.
Yeah. But again, we also know that there's a lot of money to be made, a from the medications themselves, but then from the medications that those medications cause, right? So the medication causes another problem which you need to medicate. And, people get on these pharmaceutical merry-go-rounds, and they can be very difficult to get off once you go down that road. And I've seen many people close to me go on that merry-go-round, and it's difficult to watch.
Yeah.
So up until now, over the last, how long have I been doing these kind of tests? 18 years. I've been doing functional testing. The only kind of test I've done so far is a stool test. What would be your recommendations for testing for H. pylori?
Symptoms. Always check for symptoms. Mm-hmm. If a person's got the main symptoms of H. pylori, then it's wise. Then I would probably confirm it with the urea breath test, which looks at the ammonium build up in the stomach. That would be my kind of like go-to, because I always try and base it on symptoms. If the person's got the symptoms, chances are they have it, because you can have a strain of H. pylori, but it may have nothing to do with the fact of what's kind of actually going on. And then a lot of times, I think more people are testing the actual endotoxin, the Kage and the Vake. If you're seeing high levels of them and you've got symptoms, then that's you've got H. pylori, and we need to look at not eradicating it. We need to look at rebalancing the body. Look at rebalancing the stomach acid and bringing that bacterial load down.
Yeah. Which actually brings me on nicely to a question that I'm really intrigued to get your views on. Are you familiar with doctors Andrew Kaufman, Tom Cowan, Mark and Sam Bailey, and others? Are you familiar with those guys?
No, my friend, I'm sorry. I'm not. Sorry,
okay.
Go on.
Fine. So I'm going to just hit you with it, right? So I've had Mark Bailey on my show. I've had Daniel Roitas on my show discussing this very topic, and I'm just going to throw it at you and just get your views on it. So they are very much terrain theory, and they and again, I'm paraphrasing them. So if they're listening, excuse me if I haven't got you quite right, but their belief is, and I admit it makes a lot of sense to me, is that bacteria don't cause disease. And they also have questioned the validity of being able to pass on a disease, i.e. contagion theory. And what their main view is that when someone has a bacteria, let's even call it an overgrowth, it's because it is responding to the environment of the person, right? What's kind of like your view on that?
They've I've come to a very similar conclusion to what they're saying. It really bothers me a little bit because I think, probiotics are on the growth now. Good bacteria, good bacterias. But what we're not looking at is the impact on commensal bacteria. What's the impact on the general bacteria? Because technically, H. pylori is part of the commensal bacteria, but it becomes overgrown for a reason. And what they're saying is not incorrect. It's actually very, very, very on point to like what I've started to learn a lot more. And I'll have to listen to them more. Now that you've given those names, I'm gonna steal those names. I'm gonna listen because, as I've said before at the start of this, I am a subscriber to your podcast, and I will actually hunt those down and listen to them more. But I think they are definitely on the right mark. You want to be very careful when you start messing with the gut bacteria because, I used to work with a really interesting company in America called Sun Genomics. They had a bacteria test, a stool test called Pylori. It uses something called whole genome metagenomic sequencing, and they were using the massive gut study that was done by I think Professor Tim Spector did it. He was like one of the main people behind that massive whole microbiome study. And they spent all that money, and they realized that basically when they checked all these stool tests and actually put them through the whole genome sequencing, that what they thought they knew about the gut bacteria, they didn't actually know because depending on where you lived, the person, you're bringing, whatever it was, bacteria was completely different. And I remember talking to Sonny and just having chats with him. He was the microbiologist behind it. And listening to his understanding of whole genome sequencing and reading their clinical trials and like things like IBS, it's phenomenal because he said when you start messing with gut bacteria and you're taking probiotics, you have to keep adjusting the probiotics because the gut bacteria changes. And because it changes, it can change day by day. It can change depending on what you're eating, what you're drinking, whether you're stressed, whether you're using a dishwasher. It could be changing to the type of spray that you're using. It could be changed to the different types of tea that you're drinking, the water. He said there's so many impacts on the gut microbiome when we're playing with it and toying with it with these like different products. He goes, you could actually be doing a lot more damage than you actually physically realize. And that's the problem with like the daily use of probiotics. The idea of using a probiotic daily, if you start increasing one particular strain, all those studies are done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Now, I'm not saying anything against these companies, by the way, because the companies, these companies are in the industry. They're my colleagues. I've met them, and they're really lovely people, and their research is really, really good. But the problem is there's no longitudinal evidence. That's the issue, and that's why I always get worried when there's no longitudinal evidence and the product's in the market and you're the guinea pig. That's where I get a bit.
Yeah, one of the analogies that Dr. Sam Bailey has suggested is if you took a steak out of the fridge and left it on the side for days, and after a few days you said, "Oh, look, there's bacteria decomposing the meat." It wasn't the bacteria that killed the animal, right? And also when you look at the studies done, because then people say, "Oh, well, there was bacteria in the air," but again, the studies don't suggest that that's the case. Have you heard of spontaneous generation?
No, sorry.
With regards to bacteria. Okay, so the idea of spontaneous generation is there's a particular environment in the body which creates the bacteria, right? And then have you heard of pleomorphism?
No, sorry, I'm going to say no.
Okay, so again, I mean, I think you've kind of mentioned it, but maybe haven't put the term to what it is. So pleomorphism is when a bacteria will change to another bacteria based on the conditions in which it's facing, which you did mention, right? With H. pylori, it changes state, right? And we know bacteria can go from being aerobic to anaerobic, as an example. But I think pleomorphism suggests that it can become a completely different, genetically completely different microbe. And I just find all this really, really interesting. And I found that, yes, I've been studying this stuff a long time, but I think you'd agree. The more you know, you realize the more you don't know, right? And I'm starting to really question everything that I've learned in functional medicine. But the doctors that I mentioned, they've got some great information. I'm not saying they're definitely correct, but they make the most sense to me, for sure. But it just makes me think, wow, I've got a lot more to learn.
I always say that if we think that if we're not learning, then there's something wrong. I take every day, like I take my knowledge that I've learned and I say, this is good knowledge. I had a really good friend of mine, Dr. Etienne Calabu, who's a cancer doctor. He passed away, really, really good friend of mine. And what I call him one of my like spiritual gurus. And Etienne said to me one day, we were sitting down, we're talking, and he said to me, and I remember sitting down, I was just over a bit of lunch, and he goes, Dilly, I have been to every weird and wonderful conference, and I met weird and wonderful people. I've met professors, doctors, I've met shamans, every single person. And he said, I will take every bit of information, I will take it in, and he goes, it may not apply to that situation, but I will never dismiss it. I will park it up in my brain somewhere. He goes, because one day I will that something might click and something might change. And he goes, because it's the same in the allopathic treatment. He goes, because he was a cancer doctor, and he goes, cancer is constantly changing. And our understanding, as we start breaking DNA and looking into it, gets deeper. And he said he used to joke. He was just like, I'm stupid. I'm stupid every day. I gain stupider every day because research is growing. So I gain even stupider every day. And it was a really funny way of looking at it, but it's so true. I've been in the H. pylori for a long, long time, and I've looked at it in so many different ways, and my understanding of it is constantly changing. And none of us are wrong, none of us are right, but we're just entitled. We're entitled to learn more, and that's where it is. As long as we learn and we keep pushing ourselves to learn more, we can do the best that we can do for ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting when I look back over the years. I've helped a lot of people, so I can't have been too far wrong. But what I feel, my feeling right now is that, again, going back however many years it was, 18 years or so, what I was doing to help people, yes, it helped, but I think the mechanism of how it helped them was different to how I thought it was. So whereas perhaps I was doing something that I might have considered to have been intelligent allopathy at the time, may well have actually been changing the terrain And that's how the result happened, rather than it was, treating the invader, if you want to call it that, right? So I just think the mechanisms of how things work are probably not quite what we think. And I think a lot of the research that's been done into the microbiome, which, is immense. And yes, we've learned a lot, but I just feel there's something that's still not quite understood. And I talked to a lot of people that seem quite convinced they do know. And I think there's more to it than people realize. But I don't know the answers, but I just feel that there's something missing in what we understand at the moment.
Lee, do you know what always I found so good about your podcast and your show was the fact that you are happy to learn, and that's it. And I think that is a testament to like the channel and testament to you, because you're not coming at it from a place of like, I'm smarter than you. It's coming from a place that I want to learn. I need to learn. I need to understand this so I can give better treatments to the people. And that's where like, I said at the start of the talk, I'm not a clinician. I've never been, and I'm glad I'm not one, because like I say that in a humorous way, because I've seen the stipulations that are put on people and on their learning, and you cannot question or say anything against. Even in the natural health industry, you have to be careful what you say, because if you say something that questions the narrative in any alternative way, you could be demonized and you could be cancelled. We could cancel people in this industry, and I think that's the funny thing with this industry, is that we have to learn ourselves. And as long as we can continue to learn, but we can back it up as well. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I have my theories and I'm like, okay, I've got a theory here. I need to work this out. Like, I need to see if this is going to go somewhere. And sometimes I get these theories and I put them and I write my theories down and I say, one day I'm going to see if this theory gets proved right or proved wrong. And so far, a lot of my theories have started to really transpire in really strange ways.
Yeah, I think, if you can sit back and critically think about things and you got the time to think about it, why not? Why would you not get it right? I mean, a lot of people get it wrong, right? And I, again, as a clinician and obviously I work in different areas as well. It's really hard to keep up to date with everything that's going on, right? But I can imagine if you're not in the situation I'm in, if you're not a clinician, maybe you've got a bit more time to look into things, right? So we've spoken a lot about H. pylori and acid reflux, and we've kind of spoken about the kind of medical treatments and how, what the negative aspects might be. But I guess we've got to leave the audience with some hope here. What would be some recommendations that you would suggest for people with either H. pylori or acid reflux?
So we talked at the start about those two interesting, one, the amine histamine, and the second thing, ammonium. When I started working, the reason why my interest, shall we say, in H. pylori came about was because of the fact of we were working with a product called Toxaprevent, which is a binder. And it's the only, I'll start by saying this, it's the only binder in the world that's classified as a medical device because of its proof of what it binds to, and the proof that once it binds to a toxin, it actually leaves the body via the stool. And there was a really interesting, one of the doctors in the team on the scientific advisory board, Dr. Marcus Stanton, he hypothesized when he started looking at H. pylori, and he had the conversation with me with us one day, and he was like, H. pylori has an ammonium shield. H. pylori creates histamine. Toxaprevent binds to histamine and it binds to ammonium. And then we started playing with a few different people. We started, working with people who were diagnosed with H. pylori. And it started coming out that there was evidence that people were starting to see a difference in the symptoms. And when we started seeing these different symptoms, we started realizing that we were onto something. Because what we were doing is we were taking away the histamine and we were taking away that ammonium protective shield. When you remove the protective shield, you were allowing the stomach acid to naturally destroy it. And when you were reducing the histamine, you were bringing the immune system back into balance, but you were also like, I'm going to use the word prevent, because you know what, we were preventing the spread of that inflammation in the rest of the intestines. And as you started to reduce that histamine and ammonium, you start to see a difference, not only in the symptoms, but the actual strains of H. pylori. The actual H. pylori started to reduce. And then out came another bacteria strain. So there was some research done in 2013, I think it was, a company in Germany. They were isolating strains of lactobacillus, and they found a specific strain called DSM-17648. And they said this strain, even when inactivated, when it went into the stomach, it created a covalent bond with the H. pylori. So it emits a protein which attaches to the protein of H. pylori, and it literally pulls it out of the stomach. And so what we started doing is we started messing with this protocol. We started building it. And next thing you know, we found this 5-day protocol, which completely changed the way that the bacteria thrived, because it didn't destroy the bacteria itself, but what it did is it took away that protective shield, it took away the histamine, got rid of the symptoms, and then the L-reuteri DSM-17648 bound to the bacteria and removed it. And what you had is you weren't changing the gut microbiome, you weren't messing around with the rest of the bacteria, you were just working on the toxins which cause inflammation and lead to the symptoms in the body. And it's the same with acid reflux. We were finding that when you were removing that ammonium and histamine, because of ammonium being an alkalizer and histamine being triggering the overproduction of acid, we were seeing that people who were taking Toxaprevent started seeing a complete balance of their stomach acid. And it's just phenomenal. It's a completely different approach, because we're not putting our blinkers on and saying, I've got to kill the bacteria. We're looking outside of the box, and it's that free thinking outside the box, which is what the key is.
So what you've basically done is you've changed the terrain.
Correct.
Right. Oh, awesome. Right, I think that's a really great way to end the show. But what's next for you, Dilly?
We're just working. We are currently working on we're working on like looking at basic minerals at the moment. So our big thing is looking at like what we do post healing and how to optimize the average Joe and optimizing small bits. So we're looking at like how to look at potassium and electrolytes and looking at electrolytes imbalances. We're starting to map out why so many people are, should we say the words dehydrated, even when drinking a lot of water. So we're starting to do a lot of work into that. And I think our team is just going to keep working on banging this histamine drum. I think it's time to change, to take away this 236.9 billion antihistamine market and start focusing on regulating the immune system the right way using the right products.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds great. And where can people find you online?
If what I'll do is, so the company's called Nuvo Healthcare. That's our primary business. I will send you the link so everyone can hopefully get the link in the description. The protocols are on there, and you can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube. We have our own independent channel where we talk all these different topics, like Lee, called Can I Be Candid Show.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. And do you provide like courses or books or anything?
No, I just provide advice. We just with the YouTube channel for us is our place of like, I call it this our kind of like thinking space. It's where we kind of like we can talk however we want and we can discuss theories and kind of go for that. But we just provide information and let people make their own judgment. I think most people who come to our channel and yours are very intelligent people, and they're here for knowledge, and I think they're more than capable of making their own choices. So that's what we're here to do, is just give them that information and let them make choices.
And is it for the general public and practitioners as well would probably benefit from your information?
Yep, anyone. We're here for everyone. We're here to just should we say spread support and spread love, which is probably the best part of what we do, isn't it?
Perfect. Awesome. Dilly, thank you so much for coming on. I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you, and possibly I'll get you back on another time as well.
Thank you, Lee. I really appreciate everything you're doing. And honestly, been so much fun, my friend. And I look forward to coming on again.
Awesome. Great stuff. So that's all from Dilly and me for this week. But don't forget to join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.